Hello everyone, my name is Nick. I'm going to be doing a quick tutorial today about how to use Eurorack with your iPad. So I'm going to be using an app called AUM, which I'll link in the description. But AUM is a pretty powerful mixing tool, which allows you to pull in, various audio sources, both internal to the iPad as well as external, and mix them all together, use plugins, generate MIDI sequences, and all of that fun stuff. So using AUM is a big part of this. I highly recommend you check it out. Well worth the money, and it's really useful for bringing things in like modular into your iPad and doing all of your kind of fun live editing and stuff like that on your iPad. So let's dive into it. So we're going to be looking at a couple modules here first. We're going to be looking at the Expert Sleepers ES9, which is our audio interface, and then also looking at hermod, which is our MIDI input in order to bring in MIDI data into the modular. And then we have obviously the whole Eurorack. Over to my right, which you can't see, which is off screen, which is my iPad. And that is where AUM is actually running and where both these devices are connected over a USB hub. And like I said, the ES9 is going to be the main input from an audio perspective, and the hermod is going to be the main input from a MIDI perspective. And you can see I've connected channel 8 on the hermod just to a clock, just to show that you can connect MIDI clock from your iPad and bring it into other modules. Next, we're going to go into AUM. So AUM, again, is this really powerful app that acts kind of like a grand central station for all of your other plugins and all of these other useful utilities within your iPad, as well as connecting to external data. So first, we're going to set up a mix bus. This is just a good habit to be in terms of AUM. It allows you to do better routing, better mixing for your signals. By default, AUM does not have a master bus like a lot of applications do. So you have to kind of create your own here. We're going to be using Mix Bus A, basically acting as the master out for the system. So Mixbus A is going to be going to USB outputs 1 and 2 on the Expert Sleepers ES9. And that is essentially acting as our main out to the rest of our audio. So next we're going to make a MIDI track with an AUM. And what MIDI tracks are basically a way for us to host applications that only produce MIDI data. Now, I really like the Rosetta Suite. It brings a whole lot of options to the table in terms of sequencing both drums and pitch data and sending those over MIDI. So we're going to open baseline. We're going to generate a simple baseline. Just an example. This is obviously, not intended to be, any sort of musical training, but just to give you an idea of what we can do here. So I've gone ahead and created this simple MIDI sequence. I'm going to change the output channel. So that way, once we actually wire it up together, hermod will actually be playing the output from this MIDI track onto hermod's channel 1 into the modular. And you can see I can do the MIDI routing here using this kind of snake to connect the output of the baseline sequencer to hermod. And then also you can turn on MIDI clock. So I'm going to make sure that I have the MIDI clock from AUM as the master going into hermod. So I've already set this up from a previous example, but you can see it's really straightforward to do. Finally, before we go back to the modular, I'm going to set up the input into my first track here to be the first two inputs from the Expert Sleepers ES9 audio interface. So that way we can bring back audio into AUM. Now, this being modular, obviously nothing is going to work until we patch everything together. So I'm going to just do a very basic patch here. I'm going to connect the CV or the pitch data from hermod channel 1 into the voltage per octave of plates. And then I'm going to take the gate output of hermod and bring that into the trigger input. So plates has its own enveloping. We don't really need to do anything fancy here just for this demo. As you can see, I've hit play off the screen on AUM, and you can see the sequence is actually now playing into hermod and out to plates. But obviously no sound yet. We haven't connected the outputs of plates to anything. So let's go do that next. I'm going to take both of the outputs from plates and connect them as stereo outputs into the ES9. And now you can start to hear that sound coming through. So this is being recorded on the iPad, obviously via the screen recording, but I can change the sequence in the iPad. The sequence will change in hermod and start to play a different track. Pretty straightforward. With within baseline here, I can do some cool things, like I can transpose the pitch. I can, mutate this sequence really easily. Again, these Rosetta apps are really cool. I'd highly recommend checking them out. Another thing well worth the money. And just to prove we're all connected, here I am messing around with plates, changing pitch, changing harmonics, stuff like that. Everything is working like you'd expect from a modular system. Baseline, again, does some pretty cool stuff in terms of introducing some randomization, so I can add some additional jumps or skips into this and have it, perform some accent stuff onto the MIDI output. Transposing up and down octaves, again, really easy. So one of the cool things we can do here is that we can actually use the hardware from the ES9 to do an effect send. So within AUM, we can set up an effect bus and then send audio out via the ES9 into our modular and then back into the ES9, essentially acting as an effect send. So I'm going to set that up. I'm going to use audio bus B in AUM to act as our effect send, and I will use the outputs on the ES9 marked 1 and 2 on the device, but they're actually 9 and 10 within the actual software. And that's because the ES9 has a bunch of other outputs that are not modular outputs, like the headphone out, the optical out, and the main out. So you can see now I'm sending audio from that first track and it's coming out 1 and 2. And you can see that just by the LEDs, even if there's nothing connected to them. So obviously what we need to do next is actually wire this into our patch here. So I'm going to take output 1 and 2 into our simple reverb effect up top. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to take the output of that effects into its own track into AUM. So I've brought in inputs 3 and 4 from the Expert Sleepers ES9, and those are going to be our inputs from the effects. And you can see AUM is really handy. You can label the tracks, you can reorder them. You can also bookmark them. For example, if you have a lot of tracks and you need to jump through them really quickly, you can do that really easily as well. So now we need to just actually patch it. So we're going to take the outputs from the effects module and bring it into the inputs on the ES9. And already you can hear it in the track. But just to prove it, let's just drop the levels of the main track so we're only listening to the effects end right now. In terms of hardware used, I'm using an iPad Pro. Having the USB-C off the iPad Pro makes it really easy to connect to a USB hub, which will enable us to connect both the ES9 as the audio interface and hermod as the MIDI device. And obviously being, a hub, you can bring in multiple other devices onto that. The one caveat there is iOS does not play nice with multiple USB audio interfaces. It will only pick the most recent one that was connected. So if you're trying to do something like you can in macOS where you can create aggregate devices, iOS at this time does not allow you to do that. You have to pick one. So obviously for modular, if you're only doing modular stuff, that's really easy. The ES9 gives us a lot of inputs and outputs here. You don't really need anything else. But if you wanted to, say, bring a microphone into that, you'd have to kind of find a way around that. There are ways to do it, but that's going to be on the scope of the video. Now you can see we muted the main track and you're only hearing the effects end, which is this really large reverb. And that's it. So we have our audio coming into the ES9, going into AUM, and then back out as an effects send into our effects module, and then back into AUM again, where we can control the mix and the busing and all of that. So again, this is just a simple tutorial on how to use AUM with modular. I really like it. It was really playable. It's not as, complicated or as heavy-handed as a proper DAW is. And it gets you, a fun kind of playground to experiment with. So again, thank you for watching. If you like the video, please click like and subscribe, as always.